Okay, I'm gonna let these guys kick it off. This panel is about mobile and monetizing, it says millennials, but really across generations. And I'm gonna let them take it away. You guys ready?
Yeah, are we?
All right.
Sounds like we're live.
Go.
Thank you, sir. All right, let's do this. Good afternoon, everyone. Heard it's been a quiet crowd, so we're gonna change all that, like right here. Give you guys a second to find your seats and get excited. So it's good to be here. This is actually my first time being in Seattle personally, believe it or not, so very happy to be a part of PostBack this year. My name is Chris Amos. I am the co-founder and CMO at Ampush. And we have a pretty interesting topic that we're going to tackle during this afternoon's panel, which is monetizing mobile across the generations. And so we've all kind of seen the indisputable trends that have unfolded around us for the past decade or so. I'm going to make a couple of obvious statements right now. One being that people are definitely using multiple connected devices to get information, multiple screens. Meanwhile, mobile adoption rates continue to skyrocket. If you look at the recent statistics, 2 billion smartphones expected to be shipped this year, tablets overtaking PCs by 2015. People are spending more and more time in apps. I'm sure this is not news to anyone that's in this audience. So what we want to do is take it a step further and approach this topic from more of a generational perspective. Because for the younger folks who were born in that time frame, this is all kind of table stakes. It's the expectation. It's kind of the norm these days. Millennials grew up with phones in their hands. But if you look at Gen Xers, if you look at boomers, these are folks that have encountered these or sort of started to adopt these technologies later on down the line at different points in life, and therefore have maybe different behaviors, different levels of savviness, different levels of trust, different levels of purchasing power that need to be accounted for. So the question is, as a marketer, how do I navigate all of this? How do I most effectively find, engage, and monetize mobile consumers across these different generations? So we're going to try to unpack that topic during this panel. Luckily, there's a lot of knowledge and experience on the stage, and for that, I'm joined by three gentlemen to my left. Stephen Favreau, VP of Marketing at Vivino, Tom Klingbeil, Senior Marketing Manager for the App Store channel at Intuit, and Bernardo Zamora, Senior Product Manager for the Windows Phone Store over at Microsoft around the corner. And so I'm sure I didn't do these gentlemen justice with the intros, so before we kind of jump in, we have a few topics that we want to cover and allow some time for audience Q&A. But why don't I turn it over to you guys to do your own intros, give us some background on kind of what you do and what you do for your companies.
Sure. So thanks for being here. Appreciate the invitation. My name is Stephen. I am the VP of Marketing at Vivino, and if you're not familiar with Vivino, we are the #1 wine application. We allow you to scan a wine label and uncork all the data behind it: ratings, reviews, pricing, locations. You can rate the wines yourself, share it with your friends, and you'll never forget a wine if you're using Vivino.
Hi, I'm Tom Klingbeil. As Chris said, I'm a senior marketing manager at Intuit. I'm part of the App Store channel, so we're kind of a central team that works at Intuit. So I work with a lot of our different app teams, like TurboTax and QuickBooks and Mint. So our primary responsibility is to grow the commercial success of our apps in the App Store channel. So we work very closely with Apple and Google and Microsoft to make sure that we're developing the best quality apps, that we're actually driving a lot of traffic to the store. In return, hopefully, that we'll get features and promotions from our App Store partners. So that's kind of what as a team, that's our main responsibility.
I'm Bernardo Zamora. I worked in Microsoft in the Windows and Windows Phone App Store. So it's a single store where we manage all the applications for all the Windows phones and Windows computers. So you can ask me any questions about our store.
Cool. And again, I'm Chris Amos. I'm one of the co-founders and also CMO at Ampush. We're a mobile ad buying platform for performance marketers that helps companies find their customers and grow revenue with in-stream native ads on large mobile publishers like Facebook, Twitter, and Google. We work with some of the largest and fastest growing performance-focused advertisers across verticals, doing customer acquisition, mobile app installs, online sales, and app sales, and re-engagement, and we're based in San Francisco. So why don't we jump into the good stuff? I already kind of introduced the topic of generations and different age groups and how that might need to be kind of accounted for in marketing strategies. So first softball question, how should marketers just approach this topic from a high level? What characteristics and behaviors have you seen kind of make these different generations unique, and how should that impact strategy?
Sure, happily. So yeah, at a high level, how most marketers should be thinking about this and how we approach it is, we know that not all consumers are the same. This isn't, revolutionary information. So we knew that consumers, specifically in the wine space, have different tastes and different profiles. And what we did was we attempted to kind of take our user base, which is at a little over 5 million now, and cut them up into their demographics and get an idea of what type of activity they have. And based on that activity, we would understand where we're gathering these new customers from and how valuable they are. And it allows us to skew our dollars and our products around who we want to target and how much we want to get out of it. So that's actually how we decided to quickly launch with Windows Phone. We took a look at our demographics and we ran it through Experian actually, and got a demographic profile of our users, and that helped us decide that our profile of users match well with the Windows Phone community, and it allowed us to go back to Windows Phone and work hand in hand with them and actually influence the type of products we launched. It helps influence our design and creative and the type of messaging we use. So we really view demographics as a huge indicator of how our outbound marketing should be shaped, as well as help influence the way our product is built.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that. We do a lot of customer immersion sessions at Intuit. We have a lot of customer office hours at our campus. We go out on the streets and interview a lot of customers. So everything that we do is kind of customer back. So and as far as looking at different segments, different generations, I mean, all the needs are much, much different. I was in a session last year before the tax season looking at how do we go after millennials specifically, and just the way they interact with their phones is much, much different than boomers, for an example. They're sleeping with their phones. They're giving them, pet names, weird stuff like that. That's kind of very interesting. And they have this very strong emotional tie to their mobile devices. So you kind of have to respect that as it's almost like their friend. You have to be non-intrusive with what you're doing. So that's something that's kind of specific to the millennial generation. Baby boomers, the way they consume content is a lot different. So you kind of have to understand how your app is set up, what type of content you're actually delivering, and then also within the marketing. Millennials react more to images, pictures, videos, that sort of thing. That's what we're finding out a lot more. They don't have time to really read. Everything they do with their phone is very short, concise. They have a purpose. So you just kind of have to really understand how they actually engage with the device to make very useful decisions when you're coming up with a marketing plan and a product strategy.
So the way we think about this is a little bit different, is that we manage a store of 500,000 apps. So in addition to maybe looking at one or two individual apps, we look at all the trends in the store. What's happening with 500,000 apps? And we clearly see different trends across the world, across different segments, as you mentioned. For example, many of our users have PCs. And PCs are typically older people that might be using them. So they are very familiar with the keyboard. They're very familiar with the mouse. They have a large screen. They don't want to learn new things. So some of the apps that we see most successful are geared towards making something super simple with keyboard and mouse, something similar to what they've used before. Whereas now, for example, for phone, especially now that phone is available across the world, some of the most successful apps are apps that don't distinguish between generations. Actually, there are apps that can be used in a couple of minutes, as you mentioned, very simple. They don't need instructions, very visual, very easy to use, because they want to target every single demographic. Of course, they're very specific apps, but some of the ones that are most downloaded try to understand all the segments and make sure it works for everyone.
Great. So, Stephen, you mentioned a word that I wanted to follow up on, and that's value. Generations might be part of this answer, but maybe not the entire answer. In your experience, and this is for the entire panel, and how do you think about acquiring the highest value customers, and how does sort of segmentation and thinking about generations and age and different characteristics play into that?
Sure. So when we think of value, it's not just about a monetary value. We're looking for engagement. We want an engaged audience. We want people who are talking about wine, who are writing tasting notes, who are rating wine, who are seeing comments placed on a wine that they have an affinity towards, and replying to that. So if this person here were to give a wine that I love a terrible review and just completely dog it, I would want to reply back to that person and say, hey, what's up? I really enjoy this wine. I'm a huge fan of it. What did you experience that didn't sit well with you? So for value, from our perspective, we really want to see that engagement, and we've seen that from the generation breakdown we've seen, the demographic profile we've seen that the audience that tends to be a little bit older has that engagement. They feel comfortable just throwing it out there and asking a question. You know, they totally feel comfortable replying to someone who they don't even know. And you would think that that might not necessarily be the norm in the actual case, but in our community, we're absolutely seeing that. And we put value behind that. It creates that stickiness. It creates that weekly active engagement and monthly wows and mows that we're all probably know and hold dear to our heart. It drives those forward. So those definitely provide value. And then on the monetary side, clearly they have more disposable income. Wine is not a cheap product. That's not something that, I mean, it can be cheap, but most people in our community aren't necessarily drinking, you know, the Charles Shaws of the world. No disrespect to Charles Shaw. However, so as we move into a monetization space, having deep understanding of who our consumers are, understanding how big their wallet is and how comfortable they might be spending some money on some wine, it's important for us to have that value. So while we don't have a direct LTV quite yet, if I were to be sitting up here next year, we will have entered into that wine retail space, and I'll have a better monetary answer for you. But right now, we're really looking at that engagement level to hold value.
Yeah, we certainly look at customer engagement as a very key metric for us. Revenue driving customers are obviously very important to us as well. We're very much focused on numbers, but for our business difference, so for example, Mint, we target a whole variety of users. We're able to understand their spending patterns, their behaviors, and segment that way. We don't do a lot with that data as far as marketing proactively. We do send push notifications and that sort of thing to remind people to actually continue to update their banking information, set budgets, stuff like that. That's more targeted towards kind of the millennials. For tax, engagement is important for us, but we really want somebody to have a fantastic customer experience within the app itself and actually kind of get through the experience as fast as possible. It shouldn't be something that you're engaging with for hours and hours and hours, because really who wants to do taxes for hours and hours and hours, and probably nobody. So that's kind of how we look at making sure that we're engaging customers over and over again with our Mint app and our QuickBooks app, because those are important for people to continue to stay up to date with their content, with their information, so we can provide a good value there. So yeah, that's it.
So following on what you said, some of the techniques that we've seen that apps use to re-engage users are, you mentioned push notifications, also doing daily deals or daily challenges, also the lifestyle that I'm sure your app has, so it actually continues to engage the users, because the more they engage the app, the more they can purchase within a purchase or advertising, or they actually, the more value they see, and the more they want to share with other users. And the other thing that was interesting is that probably 90% of the users that could use your app in the planet don't have a credit card. So, and you mentioned that, how do we do it in Mexico? How we do it in Russia and Brazil? What we found very successful as a store is try to enable other payment instruments like mobile operator billing. I mean, we found a big segment of users that told us, we want to buy your app. Just make sure I can buy it through PayPal. Make sure I can buy it through mobile operator. And that enables all your apps to be able to monetize in those segments. And those are some of the learnings that I'm sure all of us are taking to improve our apps or stores.
So this conversation is quickly revealing that to even have this conversation, you need to have a very deep understanding of user segmentation. But working with different types of advertisers at Ampush, we've seen that there's a very large continuum or spectrum of levels of sophistication and having the right infrastructure in place to even just be able to do that and to capture the data and interpret it and understand it so that it's actionable. What are, I guess, some of the challenges of being able to do segmentation effectively, and maybe contrast, and what are some of the things that you're looking at from a data perspective, and what's some data that you wish you had and just maybe can't get your hands on or can't?
Yeah, I'll start with that. So we have a tremendous amount of data, obviously with tax, which is very sensitive, with Mint personal financial management, so that's also very personal. So there's tons of data, almost too much data, and I think at times marketers get so involved with creating so many different segments that it just takes, the payoff is not quite there yet. So we really try to focus on our very high value customers first, figure out really what is that makeup, what's the DNA of that customer, and then kind of start there and kind of work backwards. So we're able to understand how many users re-engage with the app after they installed, how many times they engage after a certain period of time. It's those types of customers that are adding bank accounts to their account, going back in the app, we're able to serve them certain messages to make sure that they're getting the latest and greatest offers, those types of things. We know that's a high value customer, so what does that person look like? So then we create certain segments around there, around that type of makeup, again, and then do lookalike targeting through ad networks or whatever it might be. Find other customers in our kind of Intuit ecosystem that we can actually do kind of cross-marketing to, so we know that's a valuable customer. As far as data that I wish we had, I wish there was kind of a better way to tie, when you go through acquisitions, we've gone through a number of acquisitions, when you have a new app, it's hard to tie those users to existing users of other applications. So you know this customer might or might not be a user of both your apps, so we don't really have a very good way of tying all those customers together, and that's kind of a challenge that we have. I think we'll solve it at some point in time. It just takes a while.
Yeah, so on the top of segmentation. So obviously we segment our users based on the quantity of wines they scan, the ratings they leave, and those who you mentioned are high performers, top level customers. We generally build a persona of them, and we don't really touch them too much. We kind of feel like they already love the product, they're already a brand ambassador, they're pushing it forward. There's not really more things we can do to really help them. We'll do as best we can, but that's not where our focus actually lies. Our focus lies on actually the lower end, the people who have used the application once, twice, scanned a wine or two, but they haven't quite got the traction yet. That's where we spend a lot of our time there. That's where we try and engage our audience, because we try and use those really top-end segments to kind of help our lower segments pull them through. We'd like to come to them and try and infuse in the product features that will help them develop into those top tiers, whether that's by putting together a featured user set, or by using the profile we have of these top customers and finding what the difference in those holes exist between those top levels and those just introductory levels. We push notifications to them, we send them surveys, we give them like edutainment type of material, we encourage them to describe what the product could be, because some of it boils down to just lack of awareness, right? Like they just don't know that the product can do what it can do, and that's why they haven't quite engaged in it as much as they could be. So when we look at segmentation, it's highly valuable for our business, but we don't spend the majority of our time on our top tier users. We really kind of take a couple levels down below and figure what we can do to on-ramp those early stage, early adopters who haven't quite hit the curve, what we can do to push them forward onto that curve so they can take that natural acceleration forward. And I think that's an approach that a number of people take, and I'd love to hear from the audience if there's a different opinion in this, but that's what we do.
So, adding to that a couple points, we've seen that the majority of apps that have very good monetization use a third-party tool to actually track user behavior through time. Flurry or many of the others that are there are critical to actually then have the information and later take an action. And some of the examples that I've seen very effective is that, let's take a game that has some package of coins. They understand where that user is in its lifetime, if they purchase a lot or don't purchase a lot, or actually have played for 50 hours without purchasing anything, and they start surfacing different offers. For example, a 50% off if they have purchased. I mean, something like that Macy's has mastered. Well, now the best apps are starting to master that. Know when to surface offers to even get users to try out a different feature. So you try this and we'll give you something for free. So those third-party tool sets allow the app to understand what type of user they're dealing with. Should they charge more or less for the same thing?
Looks like it might be a good time to pause for questions. Don't leave them hanging.
Chickens.
They just had lunch. It's going to be tough. Someone get them some coffee.
We got one up front.
So I think we have a good audience for this question. You were talking about wanting to get users in your app up the funnel, driving engagement more and more. If you look at that at the more macro level, there are apps in general that sort of sit at that point, right, where they're just about to hit a tipping point in terms of number of users installed, engaging in, and using the app. Certainly advertising and the entire marketing ecosystem helps to drive those apps over the hump and really get them, into sort of a breakout status. Some of the discussions that we've been having amongst ourselves at Google and with some of our partners is, what are the other techniques? What other things have folks been doing to really make sure that those apps, through marketing and other means, don't just sort of sit underneath this threshold of getting noticed? You've got 100,000 users, but my God, if only I had 150,000 engaged users, my essentially I'd get over this threshold, I'd get noticed more in the app stores, and I'd hit that point where the ball really just starts rolling down the hill very, very fast. And we believe that there is some sort of threshold, and getting over it is important. Marketing is a great way to go. I'm wondering if there's any other techniques that you guys have looked at to really get those apps to pop.
I'll try to tackle that one. I think at Intuit, we're very much focused on the first-time use experience. The very first time someone actually installs the app and opens it, what does that experience look like? And we do a lot of testing to figure out what's the optimal experience, because you can drive all the marketing in the world and you can have a great message, but if someone comes to the app and it's not the best experience, chances are they're not going to go back, even if you continue to send them messages from email or push notifications or whatever it might be. So I think that's the real opportunity, is to really make sure that very first experience, that first touch point with the app is a very, very promising one, and that customer can actually say, hey, this is something I can find value in, and then they share that potentially with the people they know. So we know word of mouth is a huge driver as well.
Okay, yeah, that's actually a really good question. So, so I'm going to shock everyone here. Vivino doesn't have the largest marketing budget. We don't. That's probably not too surprising for you guys. But we do have this social component where people are talking about wine. And we saw them writing these tasting notes. I have this opinion, I taste this, I feel a lot of grip, but it's very sweet, it tastes like blueberries, yada, yada, yada. They're dropping these tasting notes. But what's cool about this is that's a person's opinion. They are actually taking the time to share this. And it goes into this Vivino world. And the way we've actually been able to get people up that curve is we try and engage users to communicate with each other, because something happens when consumers, especially in this demographic that we have, which is that probably, and I'm looking in this audience and you guys are very representative of it, so please go download Vivino. So something happens with that audience where when they make that tasting note, when they take the time to say, I think this wine is amazing, I'm going to give it 4.5 out of 5 stars, here's what I think of it, and they push it out there, and it just sits there, and it gets stale, and it gets cold, and no one says anything, that sucks. It sucks. But when we have communities built up within Vivino that reply to that, and who have had that same wine experience or have a different wine experience, and they reply to that communication, and they engage in that audience, what happens is that person sees a notification on their phone. They open the phone back up. They feel like a communication is happening. They go out and scan more wines. And when they're at the restaurant and they're scanning a wine label, or at Whole Foods and they're scanning a wine label, that activity, that actual engagement that came from that comment drives the use case, which is then driving organic installs. When someone is there scanning a wine label and posting it on Facebook and communicating about it, other people are curious. They say, what are you doing with that? Like, why are you scanning this wine label? And by driving that activity through engagement, getting them up the curve, it's free. I mean, it takes work, it takes effort. It requires us to segment our population and identify people who are good featured users who can influence others. It's not something that just happens organically, but we're not spending marketing dollars on it. We're taking our existing user base and connecting them to drive more engagement, which then people see outside of the Vivino community and want to participate and see and join in. And that is free, and that is one way we've attempted to address the issue of not having unlimited budget, but at the same time needing people to get over the hump. And when you get that reply back, I mean, if you guys are on Twitter and on Facebook and someone replies to your post or to your tweet, it feels good, right? It's better than getting a like or a refresh. When someone actually replies back to you, you jump right back in and you're like, what did this guy say? And so that's been a huge driver for us, and I encourage you guys to look at your existing user base and figure out how you can unite, how you can get that audience to just kind of churn internally to push yourself forward.
So in addition to typical techniques that you probably would see in purchasing advertising and things like I wanted to share two interesting or different ideas. One of them is make sure that all the influencers know about this product. You've, I'm sure, heard about many cases where somebody that was an influencer had a tweet about an app, and that drove usage. And with so many apps out there, those are extremely powerful mechanisms for getting many more users using it, in addition to social, in addition to something else. The other one we've seen is that many apps are available in iOS and Android and are also available on the phone, on Windows Phone or Windows. And some are really not doing that great on Windows Phone. Some are doing amazingly well, much better than in other platforms. It really depends on the type of users. It really depends on if they became popular in the platform, because most games especially go down in usage fairly fast. So what we've seen in a few of these apps that have been moderately successful on other platforms, they bring it to Windows Phone, which is another different set of users. and that just it's another set of users you can reach, and many of them have an iPhone but they have a PC, or they have a Windows phone but they have an iPad. So again, it is trying to get that additional number of users that we need to get from 100 to 150,000, or from 200 to 250. I mean, you need to tap into everything that's available.
And I'll just add one more thing to that. So I work in the App Store channel, so obviously getting featured by the app stores are extremely important to the business. So
That's what I was gonna ask.
Yeah, we've seen that when we run a marketing campaign, or we know we're potentially going to get featured by Apple or by Google, that if we run a marketing campaign in conjunction, the numbers are exponentially better. So if you have that relationship with Apple or Google, the things that you can do to make your app compliant, take advantage of the latest and greatest devices and iOS and Android versions. Promote your app, obviously, through social channels, through paid advertising if you can, to get on their good list as far as being able to get support from them. That can have a huge, huge impact on the number of downloads. And I think if people just continue to see that, they see that the partners are supporting the app, they're going to be like, you're right, I should go back in and check it out if I've already downloaded it. Maybe there's something better to it that I didn't realize before. So we've seen that help quite a bit.
Great stuff. Were there other questions?
I was going to say, how do you think about the demographic of people that are coming from the App Store specifically? Are there any trends there? Do you see like certain age groups, or like, especially, I'm sure it's different depending on the app, but what do you guys see in particular?
Yeah, I don't really have the demographic information of users coming from the App Store. We certainly know the number of users that find and discover an app through App Store search and that sort of thing, or through word of mouth. So I don't really have that level of data as far as the demographic users coming from the store, but I would imagine it's pretty similar to search in a certain way. But for us, I mean, again, the demographics do make a big difference as far as who's coming to the app and how we market to that person. Even the app experience, we know that younger users have a different attention span, like I mentioned earlier. So you kind of have to make sure that the app is right for that user. So we do a little bit of that, but again, the demographic information from the stores, we just don't have that level of data yet that we're actually using.
So we're a wine application. The demographics that we get from Play or Windows Phone or Apple, they don't vary that drastically, but what does vary is actually the regions of activity we get. So we're available in 26 countries. We're in 6 languages. We just launched a localization project, and one thing we saw from a demographic standpoint is we saw actually quite a bit more activity in communication within the application from the Latin market, specifically Brazil. So we took that information and kind of deep dived into it and figured out, like, why is it that this Brazilian population feels so comfortable and is engaged so heavily in talking about wine? I mean, they were Facebook groups spotted up randomly. I mean, they were meetups talking about Vivino. It was amazing. It was awesome. And that's an example of kind of taking a look at a regional activity. I mean, I know it's not specific to the demographic, but we're taking that segment of users and figuring out how they differ from, say, an Italian market or an American market, and seeing like what is causing that deeper integration with this Brazilian population, because it's encouraging, right? It's something that we want to see. We want to see this deeper engagement, and if there's something we can pull out of there, we don't quite have an answer yet on the demographic profile of that Brazilian audience, but it's something we're keying in on. And it's important for our business to be curious about those questions. I think that's one of the strengths that our business has, is we have that curiosity. We see something that happens and we say, why is that? That doesn't make sense. What's going on here? And it allows us to kind of cut it up and figure it out and see if there's something in there that we can say, this is a tangible piece of data. This is what could be driving this user behavior. And then we go and influence it. But that's how we kind of take a look at the different, while there's none between the different platforms, we are seeing it regionally.
So Tom mentioned something twice that I wanted to follow up on, which is this idea of attention spans. So,
and this is probably the last question. We'll wrap it up after this.
Okay. So the average person has 30-something odd apps. I have way more than that. I'm sure most of you do too. And there's this idea of how do I stand out above the noise? And so the question is, how do user acquisition and retention strategies need to take into account just competing for mind share? And does this vary for older versus younger demographics? How does this kind of play into your content strategy or just designing user experience in the first place?
Let me take that one. and I'll start with myself. In my phone, I have about 150 apps that I've installed in the last month, and almost 1,000 that I've installed since I got the phone. And I would say a power user, but there are many that, I think the average is at least 100, 150 apps that have been installed of one type or another. So that goes to your point of competition. So we did some analysis a few months ago of how many apps are users actually using. And again, focusing in games, users probably play 2 or 3 games at one time. That's it. The average person, if they get a new game, they stop using the old game. I mean, with banking apps, it's a little bit different because you always have your bank. So I'm talking apps you can start using and then stop using later. So you do have a very strong challenge on how to keep apps from being just thrown off and getting discarded and not used anymore. And of course, I'm using 2 or 3 games right now. All the other 600 that were games I'm not using anymore. So I'll defer to you to see what other techniques you use, because it is a challenge. And there are very, very few apps we've seen outside of business apps that users continue to use after 3-4 months. Just tapers off. So retention or re-engagement is super critical, and in some case, really, it's inevitable that they'll stop using it. So you want to get as much usage as possible during that time, get them to either move to your other app, or recommend somebody else before they eventually fade out and stop using the app.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge for us to be able to keep the attention span of all the users, but I think things that we can do, we're starting to do a better job of, is, again, with the millennials, they want to watch videos and see pictures and rely on social more than maybe baby boomers or Gen Xers. So giving them the availability of videos to say, hey, this is how I want to learn this way, versus potentially someone who wants to read a few pages on their iPad or something like that. They're not interested in looking at a video. They want to actually read something. So I think you have to have the flexibility to be able to do both within the app, and then the marketing can be kind of the same way. So if you're marketing to the millennials, they have a short attention span, make it very social in nature, very video focused, those types of things. Texting, everybody loves to text. They don't necessarily want to pick up the phone and call anybody. So the generations are much different in how you actually have to message to them, and that also translates to, into the app itself. How do you actually give them the content in the form that they want it?
Yeah, so you do have a short period of time to gather attention. So we spend a ton of time working on headlines, subject lines, and images, because those are the pieces that really drive the hook. We view this as like, the hook is what gets them, and they're interested in wine. They want to learn about wine. They want to be educated in wine. So we know that there is some time that they're willing to invest in this, self-improvement in the wine world. So, but we need to have that short hook, to your point, because we're competing with all sorts of different pieces out there. So we spend a ton of time working on that headline that gets put into, like, say, a Facebook ad, that image that accompanies it, that makes sure that it looks as much like that person who we think is on the other side of the screen. And we work as hard as we can on that subject line that we deliver, because we know we're competing with everyone in this room, these guys up here, on your inbox. But where we do spend quite a bit of time, and where we differ a little bit in terms of, like, we want to be quick, is we try and take, like, an edutainment angle where we want to teach you a little bit about wine. We want to give you some sort of knowledge and impart that knowledge to you, and that really can't be done in 10 seconds. You can't learn about wine in 10 seconds. It just can't be done. And people don't expect to. They want to know about wine, and they're willing to give you that time, but you first need to your point, catch them on that hook, draw their attention, and that comes in creative and headlines and taglines and subject lines. And then you need to have that content sitting behind it that isn't, 20 minutes of deep dive, but 2 to 3 minutes of a simple read, get an understanding, and then go deeper into it, right? Get deeper into the offer, get deeper into the content that will then lead you to an install. Because these people, these audience, if you guys are working with a product that has an audience that wants to learn a little bit more about the space that you're operating in, you have that time, but you need to first win the battle of getting that 2 or 3 second piece going. And like I said, to reiterate, that subject line, that headline, that piece of content, that's key. That's the hook. The second phase is sort of like the depth of the education you drive behind, in our case, wine, which we factor between 2 and 3 minutes that we invest in. That at the end of that article or at the end of that piece, we have breadcrumbs and trails to kind of take you to your next logical step. Like, you've learned about Pinots from California. Well, here are some other great wines in California. You dive into that, and then now all of a sudden we've painted ourselves as a great product that knows about wine, can help you on this wine journey, install it on your phone, and now all of a sudden next time you're at a wine bar and you look at your phone and you see what wines are out there and what they're rated and reviewed, you're a little more intelligent about it.
Fantastic. Yeah, so are there any more questions in the audience? Nope. All right. If not, I guess that might do it for time. I'll give you guys one last chance. If there's anything that you wished came up or you wish that I asked you, here's your chance to get it out there.
No, the last thing I'll say is I mentioned it before, but we were very much focused on the customer itself. We spend a lot of time with our customer, and we always call them users, and we call them user. It's just kind of an interesting thing to call a person. So we're going to start using the word people when we talk about these people, the other side of what we're doing as advertisers. And well, did somebody score a goal or something? Anyway, yeah, that's it.
I did want to touch back on something you said. It's very difficult to acquire users. Very, very difficult. So once you acquire them, you really want to make sure they stay on your app. So as you mentioned, the first 15, 20, 30 seconds of using their app should be enough for the user to start using it, get value, and get engaged with it really quickly. If you don't get them, especially the next generation, really just drops your game. And all the effort that you took into getting that user or person, it's lost. So yeah, as marketers really spend time testing, trying out that first 15 seconds of experience with your app.
Yeah, I would just finish with obviously a thank you for putting this panel together and inviting us up here. It's really awesome. And I would just encourage you guys to just sort of take a step back and really look at your marketing plans and feel like, am I communicating to a person in the way that this person needs to be communicated to? I understand that, you know, his or her decile and cohort is getting this click-through rate or this engagement metric, and that's what's driving the outbound marketing. But really take a step back and say, how is this person receiving it? Like, am I communicating to this person in a manner in which I know they want to be communicating? You can get a lot of that insight from their demographic profile, from their gender, from their household income, from their marital status, from where they live in, let's say, the United States, if they own a home, if they have kids. I mean, these are the types of indicators that help you paint that picture. And when you add that layer to your outbound marketing or your marketing campaigns, it can really be a difference maker. And if you're taking that step, your competition isn't, and your competition is just blasting out random, emails based on, open rates or engagement rates, and they're not thinking about how's this email being received and how will this person want to be communicated to, I think that gives everyone in this room an advantage who takes a moment just to kind of pull that demo data and really feel like I'm talking to this user because I know who this person is. That can really drive you guys qualified customers.
Great. So I think that does it. Thanks a lot for having us. Thanks for your time, and thanks to our great panelists, Bernardo, Tom, and Steven.
Thanks,
Chris.
Thank you.